go. We have people joining. My slides are now moving. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to today's webinar. My name is Magali Diaz, and I am your regional coordinator in San Antonio, Texas for Team Project. We're part of Partners Resource Network. A few of housekeeping items. Don't forget to use your chat box in your Q&A if we have any questions that you want to ask. And again, we're going to record this webinar and post it to our Facebook page. At the end of today's webinar, we will have a survey link for today's webinar. And then we do not provide any CEUs. Only if you need a certificate of attendance, you can request it. And then this is my contact information if you would like a certificate of attendance. Now I'm going to. Okay, so if you guys are new to Partners Resource Network, I know there might be some people that are not from Texas. We are the Parent Training Information Center for Texas, and we have 4 projects. We have PATH Project, PEN Project, Team Project, and now PACT Project. And we have regional coordinators all over Texas. We offer free support to the families and professionals that work with children with disabilities from ages 0 to 26. If you have any questions regarding how to get in touch with your coordinator, you can go on our website, prntexas.org, and look up your area so that you can contact your coordinator. So today we are talking to Charmaine Tanner, and a little bit about Charmaine. She's a change maker. Her years of advocacy as a parent, special and general education teacher have changed her son, Dylan's life, and hundreds of other students with disabilities. She also works so all students will be safer, happier, and learning every day beside their friends. Charmaine founded her own advocacy business, Collaborative Special Education Advocacy, after retiring from teaching. Her passion is to use her educational and personal perspectives to help the parents become even more effective advocates for their children. She works with individual families and also provides advocacy strategies and support with the private membership group for parents, Parent Advocate Trailblazers. You can also spend some time on her website, cspeda.com. I'll put that in the chat box, and download many of her free resources. She's also the author of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Art of Advocacy, A Parent's Guide to a Collaborative IEP Process. And also, she will be raffling this book at the end of today's presentation. So we're going to pick a winner, and you can win this by putting some comments or questions in the chat box. So thank you so much for coming today. I'm really happy to have you here. I've been watching your Facebook channel or page for a while, and I just love all of your advice and your tips that you have for parents.
Well, thank you. This is exciting, and it's nice when we have technology that can be really useful and helpful, right? So to be able to be speaking to people in different states is always exciting. So if you are here with us live, let us know in the chat box where you're listening in from. We'll see how many states we have represented. And feel free as we go along, if there's things that you think of that you have a question, type it in the chat box. I'm going to say Magali. Did I say right? Close. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat box for us. And so when questions come up, I would be happy to answer them. We'll also have some specific time during the session where you can ask questions too. So I am going to share my screen. Today we're going to be talking about making sure that you don't give up your rights as parents, and especially during the evaluation process. So we'll be talking about before you even sign consent for evaluations, during an evaluation meeting where you're um, discussing the results of the assessments, and then after that evaluation meeting has been completed, what are some action steps that you can be taking? So I was thinking the other day about when my son Dylan was really young. So here he is, he's about 3 years old, and I was visiting him at the community preschool where he was. But I remember, and this is like 29 years ago, so I'm very old. But I remember getting a letter from the school district saying that they were interested in having a meeting to talk about an upcoming evaluation for Dylan. Um, and so my husband and I went to the meeting, you know what that's like, right? All these people and notebooks and computers. Um, and the school psychologist who was sitting across from us was talking about the different assessments that they wanted to do. When he got to talking about the cognitive one, we had more discussion, and my husband and I were like, you know, we don't really see a benefit from Dylan having this cognitive assessment. In fact, we're worried that, you know, any kind of low test scores, like a low IQ score, would have that effect of people feeling like he's not as competent. We didn't feel like an IQ score or an IQ test would be that helpful for teachers in planning what to do with Dylan. And so we told the school psychologists, no, you know, we won't give consent for the cognitive testing. And even after more discussion, that was still the way that we felt. So we wound up signing consent for some of the evaluations and not signing consent for the cognitive evaluation. And so you might think, well, I don't know. I've heard Charmaine's a special ed teacher. Her husband was a special ed teacher. Maybe that's how they knew, oh, you don't have to sign, you know, like this blanket consent that you're going to, you know, allow the district to do any type of testing with your child. And it wasn't through college. I mean, as going through college, learning to be a teacher, I did not have information about parents don't have to consent to everything. Um, as a teacher, I didn't get in service that much that talked about IEPs or anything like that. So it was really through parent trainings that I went to when my son was young, and participating in things like the Partners Program in Colorado to learn like there are options, there are parental rights that sometimes we just don't know about. Um, and so the ones that we're going to be talking about today, like I said, specifically have to do with the evaluation process. But a lot of the strategies you can use in other situations too. So let me go back here. And so I'm going to be sharing, I think it's about 10 or 11 different did you know? And these might be like refresher, you know, courses for yourself, or it might be brand new information. So please feel free to, you know, give us some feedback in the comments in the chat box if you come up with some questions as we're going through this. So as I mentioned before, we're going to be doing probably the main segment of the workshop will be all the things that you need to do before you even sign consent for assessment. So we'll be doing that, but we'll also be looking at during that meeting, when you're going over the assessment results, what are some of the things that you want to make sure that you know and that you do. And then after the evaluation meeting, As in most meetings, when the meeting is done, you might feel great relief, but there's usually some follow-up that you want to do also. And I think the whole thing is, that we know as much as we know at the time, right? And when we start to learn more, then we can do more. So hopefully you'll learn some new things today. And remind me at the end of the workshop, I do have a PDF that I put together with checklists of things to do, sample emails that you can send to the school, and additional resources. And yes, we're going to give away a book. So the more you comment and ask questions, the greater chance you have. Because if you don't know my scientific way of picking winners, we're going to go through the chat and then just stop and that person will be the winner. So I hope we'll be interactive today. One of the stories that I often share when I talk about evaluations was this family that I was working with in Colorado. And I remember it was kind of a chilly January day. And the mom had called me and she said, "You won't believe what happened today." Now, if you're an advocate or as another parent, you probably know when somebody says, "You won't believe what happened today," it's not necessarily good news. So she went on to tell this story, how she had, her son came home from school. He was tired. She was trying to help him clean out his backpack. And if you're a parent, it takes courage to reach your hand into that black hole of a backpack and pull things out. But she did. And what she found was, she found like pocket folders, she found a library book, pencils that were chewed on. But at the bottom of the backpack, she found this crumpled up paper. So she pulled it out, and then all these goldfish crackers came with it, right? And she's trying to smooth it out, and she notices that it's the school district, letterhead. So she's looking at it more carefully. And here it's a permission form, a consent form from the special ed teacher. And all of these boxes were checked as far as what kinds of assessments they wanted to do on her son. And she looked at the very bottom of the page, and there, highlighted in yellow, it said, "Please sign and return to school tomorrow." So it was like, this mom for a while. So she knew that you really want to talk to folks before you sign any kind of a consent form. And just having it come home in your child's backpack, and not having any time to ask any questions is not the practice that we want to see. So we're going to be sharing some more ahas or did you knows, and also some action steps that you can take. So let's see. This is a shot from a Facebook Live I did about 6 thinking hats. I don't know if you guys know that. But I also thought it would be a good slide to show and just to talk about some of the different hats that I've worn as a person. So I've been a special education teacher. I was a general education teacher. I've been a speaker around different conferences nationally. I was an adjunct university instructor at the University of Colorado. And I've been an advocate for a number of years and also an author of our book we're giving away. This is our family. This is an old picture, but I always love it because this was Dylan's high school graduation. And you can see he loves kind of hemming it up for the camera. But we have 3 kids. Dylan is our youngest, and he happens to have Down syndrome. Now, the most fun job I have is being a grandparent, right? So we have these 4 adorable grandkids that this was taken on the last day of school last spring. And we thought this was going to be the last day of COVID schooling, but we know a lot of us are still dealing with COVID schooling, right? So let's look at, before you even sign the consent, what do you need to do? Did you know that you're part of the evaluation team? Now, I think we're used to, if you're in Texas, you're a member of the ARD team, right? If you live in other states, they might call it the IEP team. I don't think we often think about evaluation teams, but they do exist, and you are a member of it. So we'll talk some more about this in a minute. Did you know that you can ask for a meeting to discuss what, if any, assessments are needed for your child? So it's not an automatic, the 3-year evaluation is here, we have to do all these assessments. There's really a process that needs to come before that. And I think we know this now because of my earlier story, but you can give consent for some assessments and not for others. The other thing I think parents rarely understand, that they also have a right of including a parent report into the evaluation report. So it's not just the school team or the people that assessed your child that has a report in there, but you as a parent. I mean, all the things that you know about your child, you want that embedded in the evaluation report too. So let's look at, how do we know we're really part of the evaluation? Regulations, because we usually have people from a variety of states, but I always want parents to know that the federal regulations are kind of your minimum rights, and some states do give parents additional rights. So you always want to check with your state regs. But according to the federal regulations, which everybody has to adhere to, is that the IEP team and other qualified professionals must review existing data, consider parent input, decide if any other data is needed. And there's the reminder to check your state regs. If the evaluation team decides that more information is needed, that's when you need to have a conversation about which types of assessments are really needed. Again, we want to, as that evaluation team, we want to be able to have a conversation. We want you as a parent to be able to share like any private evaluations that you might have had done recently, or any other kinds of reports, maybe from private therapists. So it's not just what the school may have in their file that they want to review, but also as a parent, you want to contribute to that, and you want to be sharing with them also. So since you're part of the evaluation team, you want to make sure that either you have current assessments or you will do more assessments for any area that it's suspected that your child may have a disability. So sometimes students will, be on the autism spectrum. And so sometimes they'll be like, well, he's fine with talking and everything. We don't need to do a speech language assessment. Well, one of my questions is, what about pragmatic language, those social skills for language? And maybe we don't have to do a language test about written expression, but maybe we want to zero in on the pragmatic language skills. So we always have to be looking at other areas that maybe not jump out at us right away, but that we want to get information on. The other important thing is that the team has to use multiple sources. So it's not just one, well, we did this WISC last year, so we'll use this. It's not, you know, we did the Woodcock Johnson, this is good enough. You have to have multiple sources of information that you look at as that evaluation team. Often what I see is that decisions are made through email. So the staff members that are going to be working with your child or already working with your child, they may email each other back and forth and say, hey, you know, do you think we need to do this test, or what do you think you're going to do? And sometimes the school may also email the parent to ask for a little bit of input. But what you want to remember is that it's really important that you actually bring people together to meet. Now, the one thing that you want to remember is the federal regulations do not require that the evaluation team meet before they start doing anything. But that's why you want to check your state regs and see if in your state they do require a in-person meeting. Federally, they're not required. However, I think it's best practice. You are a member of the evaluation team. You have every right to also be in on the discussions and the conversations. So that's one of your important rights. And let me go back here. And so I thought we'd take a pause here, and I wanted to know, have you been invited to meet with the team to review existing evaluation data, to give your input, to decide if other evaluation data is needed? So in the chat, if you can type in what it's been like for you, and do you just get consent forms sent home and you have to sign and send them back in, or do you guys actually have evaluation meetings? And I'm going to take a sip of water. Magali, how are things in the chat? Do we have any questions or input?
I'm gonna go ahead and read a question that's regarding before the evaluations.
Okay.
Christy asked, can you give pointers on how to deflect the phone call wanting to do a parent interview for the evaluation before consent was signed? I recently had to address this and tell the staff member that they had the cart before the horse.
Yes, thanks for asking that. That's important. And I think some, you know, I don't know this particular special ed person or whoever you were talking with, but I think sometimes, you know, teachers are just really, you know, have this checklist of what they want to get done, and they don't necessarily think about, you know, where do we need to get permission before we do some of these things. And so one suggestion I would have, Christy, is, you know, if this comes up again, is to say, you know, my preference is that we have an evaluation team meeting and we all sit down at the table together. And then we can look at what information is really necessary. So, you know, you can say, you know, when they call you, you know, I'm glad you're interested in my input for sure during the process. I'll be sharing my input with you. Right now, I think it's better if we just sit down as a team. So Christy, let me know if that helps you.
Some of the questions that I'm seeing on evaluation meetings, Jamie Erickson says, I've never had an evaluation meeting, but I've had calls, emails telling me each of the assessment or what the evaluation being proposed was, and always have reviewed the data in a meeting after the evaluation. And then other people say they've had both meetings and papers being sent home. And someone said their district has evaluation planning meeting that fully included the parents and the team. That was from Jerry.
From who?
Jerry.
Cool. We like that. We need to clone your team. Yeah, so that's interesting because that makes me really hopeful that more parents are being, seen as a team member on the evaluation team, and that you are able to have those discussions. So I think that's wonderful. And for parents that's not a practice in your district, that's something that you could talk to the special ed teacher about, maybe the director, and just say, I've heard other districts doing this. It sounds like it's a really good idea that we pull together first before we start deciding which assessments are needed or not. Because if a parent is sharing some private evaluations that have been done, you don't want the teacher repeating those assessments if they've just been done within the past year. So that information is like, wow, they already did that over here, so we don't have to do that now in the school district. And we'll keep going because there's other things before you sign that consent form. So here it is as far as sending that email requesting to discuss the evaluation process. And my guess is you all know that we want to keep things in writing and have that paper trail. So we always want to make sure that whenever we make a request, we can make it verbally on the phone, but then you want to follow up and make sure that you send an email about that too. And then during the meeting, to feel empowered to ask your questions, because the staff needs to be able to explain to you so you really understand the purpose of the kinds of assessments that they're looking to do. Most schools will not want to pinpoint the exact assessments that they're using. I think it's helpful if we can do that. But that usually you get a lot of pushback, and they'll just do like general, like fine motor. They're not going to say, if it's going to be a Berry test or do this or that. But some, if you have knowledge about different tests, and which ones would be better to use with your child because of how your child communicates or because of physical, impacts of their disability, make sure that you ask questions about that and talk about it during that meeting to talk about the process. So here we go about that giving consent for some assessments and not for others. So when I shared this story about when we were with the school psychologist and how my husband and I did not want to sign consent for a cognitive test, I think, one of kind of the memories that came back to me when we were sitting there talking about that was when my son was born. So he was born in, like lots of kiddos, he had to spend some time in the NICU unit, and it was kind of touch and go. But I remember when the doctor told us that Dylan had Down syndrome, um, two fears came up right away for me. One was that people are going to make fun of him and think that he's stupid. And my other fear was he will end up in having to live in this yucky group home. And so when we got to the point of signing for a cognitive test, it was like, no, because I'm afraid people will think he's stupid. People will think he's not able to learn if his IQ comes out to be lower than, what's typical or whatever. So all through school, all through, elementary, middle school, high school, we never gave consent for Dylan to have a cognitive test because he does have Down syndrome. They couldn't use that, though, to say he has an intellectual disability because they didn't have a cognitive test. So instead, what they used was a speech language label for Dylan. So I was like so proud of my advocacy that we could go all the way through school and not have to worry about a cognitive test. And then life changed. And Dylan wanted to be like other 20-some-year-olds and leave home and have his own place. And in order to get support services for us, guess what they told me we needed? An IQ test. And it was like, what? I just spent like years saying no, no, no. And now one of the things that Dylan wants to do is to live away from mom and dad. And in order to get services, he needed that IQ test. So you never know how things change. We did give permission, and Dylan did have it. And, life goes on, and it's nothing that really has made an impact on him as an adult. But I think you really want to think about that when you have school age kids, because I think there is that self-fulfilling prophecy. So be careful about which tests you sign consent for. So your action is only signed for those tests that you think are really going to be helpful. And the parent report and the evaluation report, we had talked about this a little bit at the beginning, is that like the school psychologist has a report, the special ed teacher will have a report. If you had any speech and language assessments, or the SLP is working with your child, they'll have a report. And as a parent, you are not going to necessarily be sitting down doing this norm reference test with your child to write up a report. But what you're going to do is you're going to take that innate knowledge that you have about your child, and you know so much about how they learn best. Does it help for them to have an audio recording of the directions that they can go back to and re-listen? Does it help them to have that visual checklist of what they're going to do next? Those things are really important for the staff to know. And they talk, and you can talk in your parent report about where you see your child as far as math skills or reading, and what you notice when you sit at home and read together, and whether or not your child can answer those comprehension questions. So what your report is more what they call like a qualitative report, right? It's not going to be numbers and, age range and things like that. But that qualitative information that you have as a parent is so important for the staff, so they get to know that whole person, that child, versus looking at a bunch of test scores and making judgments on that. So some of the things that you can put in your parent report are what you see as your child's strengths and needs. And you can look at the different areas, the academic areas, communication, social, things like that. When you notice working with your child at home on homework, or if you're doing distance learning with your child, you are starting to notice, they can multiply one digit, numbers fine. When we get to two digit multiplication, things kind of fall apart. So that is helpful information for the evaluation. And then also that information is going to inform what goes into the IEP. So when you're making your case for what your child needs, I have the philosophy and the, I don't know, the belief that inclusive education is really important for our kids. And so whenever we're talking about our kids' needs, I always want to make sure that parents talk about, the need to be with, typical students for language, models. They, different things like they need to be in the classroom reading group and answering the comprehension questions and listening to their friends read. So instead of just saying in your parent report, they need help with reading, they need help with math, look at how you can start kind of laying the foundation for inclusive education by how you describe what your child needs. So while the staff is doing their testing, you can be spending that time, usually you have a couple of weeks, sometimes 30 days before they're going to meet again. So while the staff is doing their, norm reference standardized testing with your child, that's the time that you could be, carving out your parent report. The other thing that's really important for evaluation reports is to have people make recommendations, because it's one thing to say, this is all the things that we found out about your child, but if there's no recommendation for what the teacher needs to do or how the parents can help, it really isn't that worthwhile. So even in your parent report, it's totally appropriate for you to make recommendations as far as what's going to be carried over to the IEP. The other thing is, is that you want to get the draft evaluation report. It depends, but I would say at least 3 to 5 business days before you go to that evaluation meeting. So a lot of times parents are used to asking for the draft IEP before the IEP meeting, and I totally agree and think that's what you need to be doing. But also with the evaluation report, because you don't want to come into the meeting where they're going to be discussing about the test results and never have seen any part of the report before. So give them a heads up that you're going to be asking for that draft evaluation report. And then just like when you read a draft IEP, you want to review it real carefully. You want to jot down questions or comments that you have. So then when you go to the meeting, you already feel confident that I know what we're going to be talking about, and these are the things I want to make sure we address. So would you guys like to get some sample emails that you can use with the school, or checklists for doing your action steps for before, during, and after the evaluation? Because like I said, at the end, I'll give you the link for that PDF. So let me know if you're interested in that. And remind me, we're going to do the book giveaway. Do we have any other questions right now?
Well, everybody would like.
Everybody says yes. Okay.
I have one question about someone is asking if they've already done cognitive assessment at a triennial in the past. Is there a benefit or disadvantage to refusing cognitive testing at the next re-eval?
It depends. And I think there's a lot of research on how invalid cognitive IQ testing is. And it was interesting. I don't know if you guys know Dr. Julie Costin. She's an educational consultant and speaks a lot about inclusive education. But Julie was saying one time that if you were going for your PhD and what you want to do your dissertation on is the pros and cons of IQ testing, that they won't even let you do that, because the universities have already said there is overwhelming research that IQ tests are not valid, not helpful. So you can't even do any more research. It's kind of like the world is round. We don't need somebody doing a dissertation on is the world flat or round. So that being said, I don't know of any research that shows a benefit to it. If the test has already been done, that could be, you could say we've already, measured the intelligence through this cognitive assessment. We don't feel like there's a need for us to continue to do it. I mean, like I said, it's kind of a personal preference, but also as a professional, I don't see them being that helpful. So, I mean, you could talk to the school psychologists and kind of explore that area and, see what they have to say about it. But yeah, I think it's a personal decision. Some parents, if the first cognitive test was given when the child is really young, some parents will say, well, it's been 3 years. I'd like to see, what differences there are now. If that is something that you feel useful, then yeah, go ahead and, have that done.
Okay, another quick question. What do you recommend if you disagree with some of the input provided by your child's teacher for purposes of the evaluation?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because, just like your parent report is your parent report and the teacher's report is her report. So that's one of the reasons why you want to see the draft evaluation report ahead of time. Because then if you see the teacher saying things that you just don't really think capture the true picture of your child, then you have a chance in the meeting to say, I was confused when you said, he hasn't learned any of his sight words yet, but I get the progress report that says he's learned 50% or whatever. And so you ask it as a question, but you're prepared to ask that question because you've read the draft report, right? And then, you can counter that and say, at home, this is what I see. One of the things that you often see in reports are the parent reported. And I always felt like defensive about that when I was reading things. The parent reported. I mean, it doesn't say the school psychologist reported. And so it makes us feel like our words, our observations aren't valid or as important as somebody else's. But yeah, I would say to get your draft, read what the classroom teacher has said, be prepared to ask questions, to ask, for data to support the teacher's, positions, and then to say, this is what I've been noticing at home. Um, and a lot of times you will see differences, right, between what kids are like at home and what they are at school. But I would definitely ask questions and have a conversation. Any other questions right now? Oh, so this is, I forgot I had a Jiffy here. I love this elephant. Isn't he cute? I now have additional questions. So remember, keep typing them in the chat because I want to make sure that, this is individualized to what you need to figure out for your child. The other thing I was going to say is all of this is can be kind of confusing and overwhelming. And there's so many things that, depend on a particular situation that you might be involved in. But I do offer free, and there's no strings attached, free 30-minute phone consultations with parents. So you can just use this link, bookme.name/Charmaine. And I have an online calendar and you can go in there and book that because, what we're talking about today is just kind of the highlights of the evaluation process, but we all know that it goes much deeper than that, right? So let's go and start talking about the testing has been done, you've given the consent, and now the team is coming together and you're going to sit down and go over the testing results. So what are some of your parental rights during that time? And what are some action steps that you can take? First, I want you to think back on maybe your most recent evaluation meeting and what went well, and maybe what you would like to see changed. So you are coming to the meeting to hear about the test results. What went well when you came to that meeting, or what would you like to change? And you can type that into the chat. And remember, the more comments, the greater chance you have of winning the book giveaway. So do we have any brave people that have put things in the chat, Magali?
One person, Christina, says, my first evaluation, it's going away. My first evaluation was a full IEP or art meeting, and it was a disaster because I had no idea what was going on. Another person, Christy, says, I hate it when they rush through all the summaries so they can get it all done and the IEP in one meeting. So it's like eval and IEP.
Right, right.
Or, the comments of, we're not seeing that. You're just the parent. We can't do that.
Right, that I know that pushback that you get, right? So yeah, I think oftentimes, especially when it's like the 3-year evaluation, that the team will want to come together, have one meeting, go over the evaluation results. Most likely your child still is eligible, so they'll declare them eligible for special ed services. And then they go right into the ARD meeting or the IEP meeting and start writing the IEP, or go over the draft that they've already written. And it is a lot to accomplish in one setting. And so feel, free to be able to say, we need to, schedule another time, because it's just, and it's a pain to have to go back to school or schedule another virtual, meeting. But it really, really makes a difference when we take time to really understand things. And and I know sometimes, it feels like, oh, I'm going to ask this stupid question, but it's like, I don't get this. I don't understand what this test means. I want people to be able to explain the results to me, but I also want them to be able to share, like, so this is what your child does well. This is where it's challenging. These are things that we can do at school. I was just on a virtual meeting last week, and the school psychologist did this, testing, and she had like 0 recommendations for what to do with all this information. And it's like, so how is this helpful? So like, and I kept asking her during the meeting, I'm like, so the testing results, does that help us get ideas for new accommodations maybe that we want to put in the IEP? Does that give us ideas of maybe we should really look at this kind of an IEP goal? So the purpose of that meeting is not just to, speed by and check the boxes to say, yeah, we met, yeah, I did the testing, but it's really to be thoughtful about, how is this going to help us write that IEP? So, if a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour almost has gone by when you're still talking about the evaluation results, that's okay. If you continue to have questions, please continue to ask them. And then just say, I know we usually start the ARD meeting right away. I think we need to schedule another meeting and come back, next week or whatever. So yeah, to be able to kind of give yourself permission to keep asking those questions until you really understand it. So one of the things, and we touched on this a little bit, is that we want to not just find out what your child needs, but also their strengths. I think so many times we get caught up in, well, we want to make sure the child is eligible for special ed services. So we want to talk about, these are all the deficits, and that is not helpful because we want to know what those strengths are so we can build on them. Also, I think probably some parents know this, that if you disagree with the evaluation report, you can ask for an independent educational evaluation, an outsider to do the evaluation. So when we look at not just talking about students' needs, but also their strengths, one of the things that you can ask for is, can you, for the special ed teacher, the general ed teacher, whoever on the team is, say, can you make me a list of the things that my child can do from this testing that you just gave? I know when I was a new teacher out of college, I don't know how I knew this, but it was like I always wanted to make sure I gave the parents a piece of paper with all the things that their child could do. So when they left that IEP meeting, they had something to go home and say, yes, look at, we've got some things to celebrate here. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with you emailing the people that are going to be doing the assessments and say, can you also include in your report, what are the strengths that we notice now because of this testing that you did? And how can we build on those strengths when we're going to be teaching him new skills? So again, ask questions during the meeting. Some of these didn't turn out. What are my child's learning strengths? What are their challenges? You can ask specific questions like, what do these subtest scores tell us? Because we want to be detectives and be looking at and really kind of teasing out, if they got a score of 67, what does that mean on this behavioral assessment, And so have people stop and explain things to you. And then again, make sure people have specific recommendations that you can use for the development of the IEP. So you're going to ask questions. The other trick is sometimes at meetings, and I see this both at evaluation meetings and at ART or IEP meetings, is people will start talking about, oh, I noticed the other day that he did such and such. It was so cool. I was so excited about that. And those little things that you think are little are important pieces of information that we want to have actually written in the report. So many times people will offer strengths for the child and people will just kind of nod and smile, but nobody's actually writing it or typing it down so it will be in the report. So even if you talk about your child's strengths at the evaluation meeting, you also have to verify that somebody is writing those and they're actually embedded in that evaluation report. So, oops, we didn't leave our elephant up long enough. Any other questions? Do you see any other in the chat?
I have a question about the students' strengths. How can we make sure that they are being used for the right reasons?
Yeah, and that really then kind of goes into the IEP area, because what I like to do is I like to look at strengths and I like to figure out how to turn them into an accommodation. And so, yeah, that's kind of out of this realm of our evaluation talk today. So if that person wants to give me a call, that would be fine. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like all of this information, if it doesn't get used, it's like, so what, right? It just becomes another report in the file, and the file is another file folder in the file cabinet. So as a parent, just having that ongoing communication to check, to say, oh, when we were in that evaluation meeting, remember we talked about how well he did when he used that graphic organizer to help him for his writing. I haven't seen any graphic organizers come home. Have you tried that? Does it seem to be working? So again, asking questions and getting information. And then making sure that what comes out of the evaluation meeting gets transferred to that IEP. And then once it's in writing in the IEP, that's what they're accountable for, right? Anybody else?
Someone also commented that don't forget that parent input or parent reports can also be used in 504 plans, not just IEPs.
Yes, yes, thank you, thank you. A little sometimes unknown fact, a little trivia for 504 plans. Technically, they don't have to be in writing. Now, it's like, what? Yes, I mean, I've never seen one not be in writing, but that's interesting. The other trivia about 504 plans is parents don't have to be a member of the team that writes the plan or talks about it. And rarely do I see parents dismissed and not involved at all. But yeah, so that was interesting when you really dive in. The other disclaimer I forgot to say at the beginning is I'm not an attorney and I can't give you any legal advice. So this is based on my experience as a parent and an advocate. But yeah,
Asking,
so
how can you turn a strength into an accommodation? Just an example of how you can do that.
yeah, so that's a good question. So I'm thinking of like when Dylan was in elementary school, one of the things that really helped him was to have that visual schedule on his desk, and not only have like an icon or a picture, but the word that went with it. And, it was like laminated. He could, check it off when he was done. So that's a strength. If he has a visual to use, a visual aid, that really helps Dylan. So then it's like, oh, so when we get to the accommodations section, I got to make sure, remember, we talked about he's more of a visual learner, and that daily schedule on his desk could be an accommodation for him. And so, yeah, looking at if that's a strength for them, then we want that to become an accommodation. Like I know when Dylan was auditing college classes after high school, it was really hard for him to remember everything the professor said. And then I would be like, well, Dylan, what they talk about and such. So for Dylan, not only is he a visual learner, but if he can rehear things, then he's like, oh yeah, now I remember. So he needs the visual, but also sometimes he needs the auditory repeated. So what we did for an accommodation in college for Dylan was to use a smart pen. I don't know if you've seen those, but it's like James Bond, it's a pen and you write and it's recording, tape recording at the same time. And so he could come home with his pen and his magic notebook and press his pen on the paper and it would start replaying the teacher's lecture or whatever. And so auditory, he needed that. The accommodation was a smart pen. So let me know if that helps. The other thing, whoever asked that question, is if you can give me one of your child's strengths, then we could brainstorm like, how would we turn that into an accommodation? So I'll give you a few minutes to type that in as we go on, but if they give us an example, then let me know and we can talk about that. So we have had that evaluation meeting. We've gone over the results, and now we're going to talk about after the evaluation meeting. And you want to be able to read the finalized report, because remember, you got a copy of the draft report before you went to the meeting, but chances are there's going to be some things that are changed, added, corrected, whatever, in that evaluation report. You want to get that updated draft and you want to read it carefully before it's finalized. If there's any corrections that need to be made or things like that, you can email the staff. And my other tip for making life easier for parents is to record your meetings. And I recommend a free app that's called otter.ai, OTTER.ai. And not only does it make the recording of the meeting, but at the same time, it makes a transcript of the meeting. And as an advocate, it makes it so much faster for me to go through, like, I can read faster than listening to the tape, I can go through that transcript and I can say, yeah, remember we said this and this is what we said. So when you're looking at that final evaluation report, you can go through, if you tape recorded it, if you have the transcript, you can go through and say, well, actually, they forgot about this. This was really important. And so you can email them and say, let's make sure this is there. The other thing to double check with, an evaluation report before it's finalized is your parent input, your parent report. If they just summarized what you shared, that's not good. I mean, we want to have your language, your thoughts, your input, your words embedded into the evaluation report. Just like the special ed teacher has her whole report, people aren't like wordsmithing it and going, well, let's take some of this out or put it in. No, as a parent report, that's why you want to email it to them if you can ahead of time and just say, please copy and paste this and embed it in the report. The other tip that you probably know is, and all of a sudden it's going out of my head. What was it? Shoot. The other tip is, if you send them your parent report ahead of time and you say, please copy and paste and put this in the evaluation report, sometimes you get to the meeting and they say, oh, well, thank you for your input. We're attaching it to the report. It's like, I really don't go for attachments. They just have a way of getting lost. And so say, well, I appreciate you, wanting to include my input. I feel it's really important that it's embedded in the document like every other team member's report is. And so you just kind of are nice, but assertive about, no, everybody else gets their report and so do I. Now, if you disagree with the evaluation or you don't believe it was sufficient, you can ask for an independent educational evaluation, which a lot of times is abbreviated as IEE. So you don't have to accept an evaluation report that you don't think is accurate for your child. If you've had lots of conversations in the meeting and they're still pretty stuck on, no, this is what we think is true, this is what we're going to have in the report, or if they forgot, to do some areas of assessment and it's not really a complete evaluation, you can ask for an IEE. You want to check what your state regs say about IEEs, but I can tell you from a federal level, the district only has two choices when a parent makes a request for an independent evaluation. The district can say, yes, we'll pay for that. Or the district can say, no, we think our report is sufficient and we're going to file for due process and see what the hearing officer says. So those are the only two choices a district has when you make your request for an independent education evaluation. One of the choices is not, no, we're not going to pay for that, and they forget all about it and nothing ever happens. So they either pay for it or they file for due process. A few years ago, I was seeing more districts around the country really file for due process over IEEs, which is a little silly because usually that costs more for due process than if they had paid for the evaluation. So don't be surprised if they file for due process over that. Um, but generally, they'll agree to it, and then there's certain things like they can give you a list of qualified independent people. You do not have to pick somebody from their list. That's just a suggestion. The other thing that parents don't know a lot of times is the district can ask you why you want to have the IEE, but you don't have to explain why. And again, that's in the federal regulations that parents don't have to necessarily give a reason. So I usually say when you're making requests for things, just keep your emails short and sweet. Um, and that usually makes things go a little bit smoother. So I don't know, maybe somebody can tell us, have any of you guys filed or requested an IEE, and how did that turn out in your district?
I have someone asking if this applies to a behavior intervention plan.
As far as asking for an IEE for the behavior plan?
I believe that's what she's asking.
Yeah, so that's part of the evaluation, right? And I mean, we've done that, especially, I've had some families I worked with and their kids have had like some really traumatic things happen. And, if the district is like really all their, behavior people are pretty much behaviorists and don't have that much trauma informed training, then you get a real different picture of who your child is. So a lot of times we'll ask for an IEE and then make sure that we can find somebody who has that trauma informed training and can observe the child and make recommendations with that lens on versus more of the traditional behaviorist lens. So for sure, you can ask for an IEE for that too.
Someone says, can they also disagree with the IEE? Like this person says they came to the school with a private evaluation and they disagreed with it. Can this also happen with an IE?
Yeah, and that's, there's always, these little loopholes, right? So in the federal regulations, it says the district has to consider the results of any independent evaluation. So what's the word consider mean? I mean, that's right up to interpretation. Does that mean they can say, yeah, I read through the report, I considered it, and we don't agree with any of it? Or usually I think schools really do take the time to read independent evaluations. And most times, if they're done by like, credible people, and the school district might know that neuropsychologists or whatever, and they trust that that evaluation is going to be valid. Most times, in my experience, I've seen districts take at least pieces of the independent evaluation and use that, when they're writing the IEP. But they don't have to. All they have to do is consider it. And I think we're almost done here. And then I think one of the final points as far as after your evaluation meeting and you're now transitioning into the ARD meeting or the IEP, is that you want to use that information and help write, a truly individualized, program for your child. So many times I think people see the evaluation process as that's done, that's over here, this is like a separate thing. Now we're switching gears and we're just going to go with the IEP. But it should really inform what's in the IEP. And so that's why I caution parents who want their children to be included more. Look at how you are phrasing things in your parent evaluation report, because you want to start building that case for inclusive education as soon as you can. So the way that you word things in the evaluation report, especially as far as your child's needs, you can just take that language and say, oh, we in the evaluation meeting, we talked about how they really need to learn these social skills in the natural environment, not in a, room down the hall. And so there should be this common thread that you can pull into when you're writing the IEP. So these are some of the action steps that we talked about that you can do before you even sign consent for assessments. So we talked about requesting that you actually have a, sit down meeting with the people on the team to keep asking lots of questions. So they need to be able to explain things to you so you understand it. Only sign for what you agree to. Make sure your parent report is embedded in the evaluation report. Ask for the draft evaluation report so you have time to process that. Jot down your questions and comments. You can do it right on the paper, right on the report, as long as it's not the original. And then take that to the meeting, and it makes it, a smooth kind of tool that you can use. Then during the meeting, we want to make sure, again, you're asking more questions. You're making sure those strengths are really written and they're not just head nodders like, yeah, that sounds great. We want strengths written down. And after the meeting, you want to read it before it's finalized, submit any kinds of corrections or additions that you might think are important. And if you disagree with the report, make sure that you make a written request for that independent education evaluation. So, here is the link you can use to go get the handouts. So it's down the bottom of the slide, IEP Today /get eval guide. So Magali, could you put that in the chat for people?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'll say it again. It's iep.today /get eval guide.
There
And
is
then, go ahead.
There is a question regarding when you have corrections that you want to be made on the report and they ignore the request. What should this parent do after that?
I know. So follow back up and remind them that you're making this request, that the corrections be made, that you want to make sure it's a really accurate document. Sometimes parents, they blow you off and not answer your emails because they know, 75%, I don't know, of parents won't come back and ask again. So follow up with that email, remind them. If it gets to a point where they're like, no, we don't really think that happened, we think it happened, sometimes, not that often, but sometimes I'll use the transcript of the meeting to say, well, if you look at this conversation we had, at the 5-minute timestamp, this is what I'm talking about. So you can offer that. Sometimes the people will be like, nope, we're not changing anything. This is how it is. Some parents will write like a minority report or something as kind of like a rebuttal to the evaluation report. And you ask that that be included in your child's permanent file. And depending on how big the issue is, if it's really super important, I mean, you could, ask for a facilitated meeting to help. You could ask for mediation to help. So it kind of depends on how big of a deal it is. But generally, when they, ignore your email, follow back up, with some more emails. Keep your paper trail going. So I think let's see, at the spot where we can do the, let me see here, the book drawing. So if anybody wants to say hi, hello, what state you're listening from. So you get another chance to have more in your, in the chat there. So the scientific way that that I usually do this is just, like I said earlier, close my eyes, and Magali is going to be the person, she's the Vanna White that's going to tell us who the winner is. Everybody needs to be making a drum roll sound. Like I said, it's scientific. And she's going to stop and see whose name she stopped on. Are you muted? Am I not hearing you? Oh, you're muted. How many times do we say that on meetings? You're muted. I can't hear you. There we go.
Oh my God. Okay, the name was Virginia Lee Puma.
All right, Virginia. So Virginia, I'll put up a slide here with my contact information, my email, or if you want to send me a Facebook message or something, just give me your mailing address and I'll have a book sent out to you. So congratulations, Virginia. And my books are available on Amazon, and you can get the Kindle version, or you can buy the, paperback version. So if you want that, you'll be able to find that on Amazon. So this is just some of my contact information. Like I said, if you want to do the free 30-minute phone consultation, it's bookme.name/Charmaine. There's my email and my website. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
They are asking for the title of the book again, so they can.
Oh, sorry. So, so it's called The Art of Advocacy, a Parent's Guide to a Collaborative IEP Process. I think if you go to Amazon and start typing The Art of Advocacy and then a Parent's Guide, usually Amazon will know what you're talking about. And I don't know, is there a way, I don't know if there's another way to give people links or anything. I guess the other thing that you could do is you could email me and I could give you the direct link to the Amazon page where you can buy it.
Or they can visit your Facebook page.
That's true. I know. And I forgot to put that up there. It's Visions, plural, and Voices together is my Facebook page. And you'll be able to see, I don't know, I think I have over 200 different live videos there. I also have a YouTube channel, and you can go there and see lots of videos too.
And you have some neat merchandise. I love the mug you have.
Oh, I know. This is fun, right? So it's, hello, my name is That Parent. And yeah, and then there's other ones that say, hello, my name is That Parent that believes all kids are competent, or, all kids can learn. So there's kind of a variety of sayings for it, but because I know when Dylan was growing up, I was called That Parent. And that's okay. I mean, I felt like I was polite and tried to be collaborative, but sometimes, you just have to be a little more assertive, and that's okay.
And sometimes we don't come off as collaborative, in the
Yeah.
right, we're demanding.
Yes, I know. And that's what really the book, because there's so many books I think about, IEPs and what makes a measurable goal and things like that. But the purpose of this book was for me to kind of look at more of, that relationship, the communication. So there's a whole chapter on here, different kinds of questions you can ask. And I have like scenarios, so, it makes it more realistic. But yeah, just learning how to ask questions like, what would it take to include my child? But I know you also have an evaluation form that you want. So will parents get that in the email, or how does that work?
Usually as soon as people exit our Zoom, it'll prompt,
Okay,
it'll pop up on
it'll
their.
come up.
Mhm.
Okay,
And I
okay,
will post
cool.
this recording on our Facebook page, and then I'll send you a copy for your Facebook page. And that was a great presentation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Welcome.
Do I stop the
I
recording?
know.